Trigger warning, this episode contains graphic descriptions of self-mutilation.
Yeah.
I've just seen on the camera. I was like, what's that on my face?
I was just behind the microphone.
I just ate a bit of chocolate and I had it smeared all around my face.
I mean, that's lovely for everyone, isn't it?
Yeah, just a visualization of my chocolate. It was white chocolate as well. And I was like, what's that on my face?
Well, at least it wasn't dark chocolate or something. I was going to say, come online, got shit smeared up your face. Nice.
Yeah. Another day.
Another day, another stain of something smeared on your face.
Right, shout out.
Shout out.
Whoop, whoop. So this shout out is to our newest blammer. Cindy, welcome aboard. We did do a shout out in the actual blam episode, but
welcome, Cindy.
Yeah, welcome. Thank you.
We're glad to have you.
We absolutely are. And just to reiterate, if you do want access to the blam episodes, we've got a few on there now. They say mini episodes, but actually they're just as long as normal episodes. So.
Yeah.
Because I don't know how it happens. If you do want access to it, on the episode show notes, when you go down in the description, there is a link there. Click on the link and it's to subscribe. It's literally $3 a month, which I think if in England it's like £2 something, £2.56, so something like that. It's less than the price of a coffee. Subscribe a month and you'll get access. You get 2 episodes a month extra.
And who doesn't want that?
Who does not want?
Well, all the people extra that aren't subscribing, I guess.
If you don't want it, fine, whatever.
Yeah, whatever. We're not bothered. We are bothered. So, yeah. Thanks, Cindy. Love that.
Yes.
Do we know where Cindy's from?
No.
I think we should start doing that so that we know where our blammers are in this world.
Yeah, get in touch, Cindy.
Let us know.
Let us know where you are. Right, I was going to look up my random blam, wasn't I?
Oh, yeah. Well, in that case, random blam, go. Well, I'm going to start with my random blam. And my random blam, I didn't even have to do or research myself. My random blam is from Hannah. And Hannah sent us a really lovely message. She was like, I love your podcast so much. And I was like, oh, do you know what, Hannah? I know you're listening because you have put on your message that you listen every single week. I so needed that. I'm going through a really shit time at the moment. And when I got that message saying, I love your podcast so much, I thought, do you know what, Hannah, you have sensed my vibes. You have heard me. I don't know where Hannah is either. Whereabouts does Hannah live?
Oh,
she's like in Essex. UK. Oh, yeah, Essex.
Yeah, Essex somewhere.
All right. Well, Hannah, sup? Going downtown?
I think she's more eloquent than we are.
Oh, shit. All right. Sorry, Hannah. Well, on that note, Hannah sent me a tongue twister. There's a chip shop in space that sells spaceship shape. Can't even say it. There's a chip shop in space that sells spaceship shaped chips. There's a chip shop in space that sells spaceship shaped chips. There's a chip shop in space that sells spaceship shaped shits. There you go. I mean, have any of you been there? Can any of you say that they don't sell spaceship shaped shits?
There's a chip shop in space that sells spaceship shaped chips.
Oh, fuck's sake.
I don't. My brain didn't even register whether that was right or not. There's a lot of chip shops.
Shop. Well, yeah. No, Sarah's able to do it. I am not, which is infuriating.
Yeah, despite the fact that words don't quite come easy to me. I don't even like that sentence.
Ridiculous sentences do.
Ridiculous.
What does that tell you? Things
There's a chip shop in space.
Make sense.
I know. There's a chip shop in space that sells spaceship shaped chips.
There's a chip shop in space that sells spaceship shaped shits.
Almost.
There's a chip shop in space that sells spaceship shaped chips. Yay!
You've done it. Smashed it.
Leaving it on a high.
Right. My random blam is obviously related to the episode. And Josie pointed out to me that I say the word pertains too much, so I've changed that. So I hope you're happy.
Josie, that's to you.
So this is a random fact, and it's quite interesting. You are around 100 times more likely to be killed by a toaster than you are from a bear if you live in the US or Canada.
Oh.
Yeah, you'd
Why?
think that
In the US and Canada, toasters are like savage.
absolutely. Bears
Feral.
friendly as anything.
What about a bear that's got a toaster?
Yeah, I wouldn't, you know.
Don't even risk it.
Leg it.
Yeah, leg it.
Yeah.
Leg it into town.
Into town.
Leg it into town.
I've also got, where's it gone? It's gone.
I love toast as well. I mean, I love bears as well, but.
Yeah. The deadliest shark attack in history happened in 1945 when the USS Indianapolis was sunk and up to 150 crew were eaten by sharks.
Jesus.
Yeah.
150. I bet the sharks were like, yes.
Nom.
I'm having two. I might even have three. I'm going to have three.
Going in for seconds.
That's it. Should we share 10 between us? Let's get a portion. How many in a portion? Oh, they must have loved that, mustn't they? Blimey. Yeah. And do we know that when the ship sank, that it
was it selling chip shop chips?
Was it shark-shaped chips? Was it anything to do with the fact that there was maybe about 200 sharks underneath?
They sunk the ship.
They were like, let's bring this down. Yeah. Jesus.
Right, random blam's done.
Random blam's done. Thank you, Hannah, for my random blam. Random blam's done. Morning. Morning, everyone.
Morning. So, I actually put out on Instagram a poll for people because I couldn't decide what episode I wanted to do. There was a few episodes that I really wanted to do, and so I thought I'm gonna put it to the people.
Well, I'm gutted because I have had no time to look at Instagram, and if I'd looked, I would have had an idea of what the episode might be.
Yeah, well, you don't. So the people have spoken. So here is the episode.
What is it?
127 hours. Horror at BlueJohn Canyon.
No. Oh, this is hideous. I know. Yeah. I do know this story. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Really enjoyed this. I thought my thought process was this one is going to be quite a straightforward episode to research and to write because it's very well publicized. And actually, there's not like when we do the murder ones, there's a lot of people involved, so there's a lot of information that you have to gather. This one was going to be quite straightforward, and so I thought, that'd be a nice, easy one to write. Delved in. No, weren't at all. But yeah, it's a good one though. So here it is.
Cool. I'm glad I ate before.
Yep. Aron Ralston was born on October 27th, 1975 in Marion, Ohio, to parents Donna Ralston and Larry Ralston. And he grew up in Marion with his younger sister until the age of 12, when the family decided to relocate to Denver. And up until that point, Aron was a bit of a recluse, and he actually said he was a self-proclaimed bookworm. He liked being indoors, and he liked reading and, the comforts of being safe and indoors. He had a very logical, analytical mind. He was very book smart. The move to Denver ignited in him a love for the outdoors. And after watching the film Avalanche and reading the book Into the Wild, he decided that that's what he wanted to do with his life.
Have you read that book?
No, but I know of the book.
It's brutal.
Yeah. So I don't know why he read it and was like, oh, that sounds great.
I want to do that.
I want to do that. And Avalanche as well, because loads of people die in that. Anyways. So he learned to ski and then he began backpacking. So the book Into the Wild is about a man that packs up everything, lives out of his truck, and then travels around exploring the great outdoors. And although he eventually dies stranded alone in the wild, that is something that Aron strived for. He wanted to live out of his truck and he wanted a carefree life. Throughout his college years, he spent more time outdoors than he did studying. His passion for mountain climbing, in his own words, provided him with eternal peace of mind. But despite his lack of studying, his analytical mind got him into a very prestigious university where he studied mechanical engineering, French, and music. He had an ear for learning new languages and he was fantastic on the piano. So he obviously had an ear for things.
Yeah.
After graduating from university, Aron landed himself a very good, very lucrative job working for Intel as a mechanical engineer. However, that job itself limited the amount of time that he could dedicate to his goals and to his love of mountain climbing. Aron had set himself a goal of climbing the 14ers in Colorado. And the 14ers are sets of peaks that are at least 14,000 feet high. And there are 59 of them.
Jeez.
He'd already managed to climb all of them. He'd already done it. But for Aron, that wasn't enough. What he decided to do was that he wanted to climb them all in the dead of winter and solo. And it was a feat that was so difficult that he'd never been done before.
There's a reason, Aron.
I know. In 2002, Aron made the decision to quit his job, his very well-paid, lucrative job. He decided to jack it all in because he wanted to focus on his goals. So he left behind his high-paying salary and he moved to Aspen, where he got a job in a mountaineering store. It's a bog standard mountaineering store. But what that did was it allowed him to work with like-minded people. And also it allowed him the freedom to climb when he wanted and to spend days away camping, living out of his truck, just like he'd dreamed. By 2003, he'd already climbed nearly 40 of them. So in the dead of winter, solo, he'd already done 40 out of the 59. But they hadn't come without risks. While he was either attempting to climb for his goals or just out for fun, Aron had gotten himself into some sticky situations before. During one of his canyoning excursions, he'd found himself in water higher than what he'd anticipated, and he'd almost drowned. And at the beginning of 2003, he and a group of friends decided to go skiing, despite the fact that there had been a Category 5 avalanche warning, which is the highest level of warning. They went, pretty certain there's going to be an avalanche today, so stay away from the slopes. And they went, oh, do you want to go skiing? Let's go skiing. That's a great idea.
Looks like a great day to go skiing.
So when the expected avalanche did occur, they were all swept up in it. Aron was buried up to his neck in the snow with only his right hand to free himself. So he had to use his only remaining hand to dig himself out. His friends were also incredibly lucky to have made it out as well. And they actually, I believe, the friendship didn't last. They all kind of went their separate ways. I don't know whether it was because they was like, you didn't listen to us. We said no. We said not to go. Look what's happened. I don't know why, but the friendship kind of didn't survive the avalanche. Some people said that Aron had a death wish because he was reckless and he took unnecessary risks. But he was also incredibly experienced. So for what most people would say was a risk, for Aron, he knew what he was doing because he was so experienced. He'd reached elite status in the world of climbing. So on Friday, the 25th of April, 2003, he didn't think anything of the trip ahead that he had planned. He was going to spend his Saturday exploring BlueJohn Canyon. Aron was an avid canyoneer. And I don't know if that's a word, but
I was just about to say, I've never heard of that before. I mean,
he likes going canyoning or canyoneering. So I assumed that a person that liked to do that would be called a canyoneer. So that's what I've gone for.
Okay.
So if you're not sure what canyoneering is, it's pretty self-explanatory, and it is the exploration of canyons.
Do you know what? That makes sense, but I've just had an epiphany come to me. You know, we were saying, oh, it'd be really cool one day to like write a Perplex podcast book.
Yeah.
Our first book is going to be a dictionary.
Yeah, it needs to be it. Sarah's dictionary.
Yeah.
So canyoneering involves climbing, abseiling, butt sliding, scrambling, anything that you can do with your body to get yourself through the canyon. So a canyon can be quite wide, like the Great Canyon, or it can be incredibly small and maze-like. And people describe canyoning as the exploration of forgotten earth, because what they can find is amazing, like down in the canyons and stuff. So and so that's what Aron wanted to do. And he actually likened his trip to a visit to the beach, where most people would go to the beach to relax. He wanted to go and explore BlueJohn Canyon. So it was comfortable for him, and it allowed him to be at peace and to be alone with his thoughts, and to quiet his brain. You know, we all need a switch off. So Aron left his home in Aspen, Colorado on the 25th of April and drove the 300 miles to Canyonlands National Park in Utah, an incredibly remote location. It's desert stretching out as far as the eye could see. It took him most of the day to reach his destination. He parked his truck and camped out for the night, ready for an early start in the morning. Saturday morning came around. He dressed in his t-shirt and his shorts. It was a hot day, so he was very casually dressed, and he packed up his bag. He took with him 2 burritos, 3 liters of water, his pocket knife, his head torch, his trusty video camera, and of course his climbing gear. So he grabbed his bike and he cycled the 20 miles to the entrance of BlueJohn Canyon. So he had a guidebook with him that showed him exactly where the entrance was, and then what the route looked like going through BlueJohn Canyon so that he wouldn't get lost. BlueJohn Canyon is described as a slot canyon. So I'll try and paint a picture for you, because I'm a very visual person. So I need to visualize what it looks like so that I can get... Why are you laughing?
It sounded like you said it was a slut canyon. I just had visions of it going, come on then.
In you come.
In you come. I'm up for it.
No.
I tried to get it out of my head, but it wouldn't go.
No. So I will try and describe it as best as I can. Imagine the Grand Canyon with its like the 2 like bits either side, and then the deep ravine in the middle. So it's exactly like that, but pushed together so that the ravine in the middle is about 3 or 4 foot wide between both sides of sheer rock. It's a very, very small gap. From the ground, the entrance to BlueJohn is near enough invisible. And then from the air, the slot literally looks like a crack that runs through the earth. It's incredibly narrow. But for Aron, it was an adventure. It is what he wanted to do. So once he'd cycled to the entrance, he locked up his bike and he walked to the entrance of the BlueJohn Canyon. So if you're picturing like 2 giant rocks with a gap in the middle that you're just going to walk through, you are incorrect. That's not what it looked like. As you're entering BlueJohn, the first thing you have to do is climb down. So it's a 15-foot drop down into Blue Canyon. You had to climb over a ledge, and then what Aron did was actually, he didn't use any climbing gear, but he just kind of shimmied his way down. Once he was down onto the canyon floor, he then had to squeeze between the 2 sides. Like I say, they were about 3 or 4 foot wide, and sometimes they got narrower, sometimes they got a little bit wider. And he would have to go under and over chalk stones, and they're very common in the canyon, and they're described as being either very large or quite medium-sized boulders that have separated from the canyon wall. So
Mm.
they've either broken off from higher up and then fallen down into the canyon and then become wedged, or they washed in by flash floods. So as you're walking through, there's giant stones, and some of them you have to kind of limbo under, some of them you have to climb up and over. So it's not just an easy walk through.
Got ya.
So after the 15-foot drop, Aron makes his way through the canyon and slowly descends until he was 100 foot below the surface.
Ooh.
Just kept winding down and down and down. 15 minutes into his climb, Aron came across another ledge where he'd have to make his way over a chockstone and down onto a ledge and then drop down onto the canyon floor. A tricky maneuver for the average person, but it posed absolutely no threat to Aron. He put his foot on the chockstone to make sure that it would hold his weight, and then got down onto his tummy and started to lower himself down. With both hands above his head, gripping onto the chockstone, his lower body hanging freely, he stretched out his feet, looking for a foothold. But before he could find it, the boulder he was hanging onto dislodged. Aron began to fall to the canyon floor. The now loose chockstone was falling above him. So he reached out. He reached out both hands to protect his head. In the 3-foot space they both occupied, there wasn't much room at all. It was an 800-pound boulder, and it came slamming down onto Aron's left hand. It crushed it against the wall, and then it bounced off, crushing his right hand against the other side of the wall. Aron's feet found the canyon floor, and the chockstone and Aron's right hand slid down the wall together until they became firmly wedged.
Oh, God. It's just hideous.
He only fell a very short space. I think it was, I can't remember how far it was. Might have been 6 foot, something, 3 foot maybe. It wasn't a massive drop down.
Yeah.
So you can imagine this giant boulder coming towards you. But he described the pain as 100 times worse than slamming your hand in a car door.
Oh, God.
And it took him a moment to assess his situation and realise that his right hand was completely crushed between the boulder and the wall. The back of his hand was flat against the wall, with his hand open and outstretched, so he could see his thumb sticking out the top. And it was from just before his wrist, so all of his hand and then just before his wrist. They literally couldn't see any of his hand, just his kind of forearm sticking out. Standing on the floor,
uncomfortable.
Yeah. Standing on the floor of the canyon with his left hand free and his right arm stuck out in front of him, he tried to push the boulder, to lift it, to roll it. He actually became very angry with himself for such a stupid mistake, and he took this frustration out on the boulder. So he was slapping it and, trying to budge it with his shoulder. And there wasn't much space at all. He was very confined with what he could do. But despite his anger and frustration, he couldn't move the boulder at all. The adrenaline and exertion had left him hot and sweaty. So with his left hand, he opened his pack, retrieved his water bottle, and began to drink. And then the realization hit him. He had no idea how long it would take for him to free his arm. He needed to save his water. So he popped the lid tightly back on and began thinking of a plan. He was trapped 100 foot below the surface, 20 miles from the nearest paved road, 300 miles from his home. He hadn't told a single person where he was going.
Oh, Aron. He
didn't have a mobile phone. He wasn't expected back to work until Tuesday, which was 4 days from them. And he knew he couldn't wait that long. So his analytical brain kicked into gear. He had 3 options. Option 1, hope that someone would find him. But he didn't think that was a realistic possibility. BlueJohn Canyon wasn't a canyon that was visited very often. He'd been the only person there. I think he'd stumbled across a couple before, sort of like when he parked his truck on his cycle and they were heading in the different direction. He was completely invisible from above. He was in the canyon, so he's completely invisible from all angles. Option 2, he could chip away at the boulder and try to break it up and then wiggle his hand free. Option 3, he would have to amputate his arm.
Yep.
He chose the second option. He had with him a multi-tool pocket knife, and he held it in his left hand like a dagger, and he began to chip away at the boulder. The blade was dull and cheap, and it was something that he'd gotten free from the garage. You know, when you go to the garage and you put petrol in, and there's like, if you buy this rug, you'll get this free thing. So it was a cheap tool. So it didn't have much impact on the giant 800-pound boulder. But Aron had nothing else to do but continue to try and chip away at this boulder. His first night in the canyon was awfully silent and bitterly cold. He had no respite from the wind that came howling down the tunnel-like canyon. He had no respite from standing upright. He had nowhere to sit. He was trapped against this boulder. He couldn't sit. He couldn't, go. He literally couldn't go anywhere else. So he got absolutely no sleep. He was confined to his tiny 3-foot space. And what made it feel even smaller for him was that looking up 100 foot above him, his view was mostly blocked by other boulders. So he kind of felt entombed. He could see a small bit of daylight or night sky, whatever it was. But the rest was blocked out by other chalk stones.
Yeah, because I was thinking, like, what would I do if I was in that situation? And I was thinking I'd probably have taken something like a flare gun or something. And I was thinking I'd fire a flare up. But I mean, the chances are I'd fire it up and it'd hit one of the other boulders, which would dislodge it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, goodness.
When the sun started to rise the next morning, Aron saw a raven fly overhead. And he thought it was a symbol of his upcoming fate.
Oh.
But this only renewed his determination to escape. He had limited himself to just sipping his water. He only allowed a mouthful of food every few hours. And for the whole of that Sunday, he spent 15 hours just trying to chip away at the boulder. Just continuously chip, 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 chip. And you've got to remember as well that his left hand, his good hand, his free hand, was crushed by the boulder in the first place.
Yeah, so that was injured anyway.
Yeah, it was swollen, and I don't know whether he sustained any broken bones. It doesn't ever focus on that hand; it focuses on the other one. But I can imagine it being incredibly painful. He also managed to design a pulley system with these climbing ropes to try and lift the boulder.
Wow.
So yeah, with his one free hand, he got all of his ropes out, and he designed this up and over this boulder, and then up and over a rock at the top, and he managed to design this incredibly sophisticated pulley system. But it wasn't enough. He couldn't get even just a few millimeters would have been enough for him to slide his hand out, but the boulder didn't move. Aron actually said he didn't even get it to move microscopically. It was wedged, man.
Yeah, I can imagine.
In his heart, he knew these attempts were futile. He was running out of water, running out of food, running out of strength. He knew he was in real trouble. So to keep his sanity, Aron would periodically bring out his video camera and talk into it.
I don't know what it is about me. It's brought me to this, but I go out looking for adventure and risk so I can feel alive. I don't tell someone where I'm going. It's just dumb. God, I'm really screwed. I'm going to shrivel up right here over the course of the next few days. God damn. It's really sinking in how dumb this is. So many things about it. So many things. It's going to be a really long time before anybody gets to me. I've been putting a lot of effort into staying warm. I have very, very little water. My body's having difficulty controlling its temperature. I'm in deep stuff.
So those are just a few clips that he recorded over the course of the night. As the second night rolls around and dehydration sets in, Aron's finding it harder and harder to repel the cold temperatures. So he actually wraps his rope cords, his climbing rope, around his exposed legs and his neck to try and keep that cold out. And to keep him constantly moving as well. He said that sometimes he would nod off and then the cold would wake him up. So then he'd have to start moving again. So despite the fact that he had absolutely no energy, he had to constantly keep moving. Otherwise, he would suffer from hypothermia.
Mm.
Despite his predicament, though, Aron never once panicked. He allowed himself one scream a day. And that was a scream of help. And he said that was to kind of release his frustration and, you know, on the off chance that someone would hear him. But he didn't like hearing his voice sounding panicked. He didn't like hearing that desperation in his voice. So he limited it to one a day. Monday morning came around, and so did the raven. And by Aron's watch, it flew overhead at exactly the same time every morning. And this became his morning routine. It was something that started his day. By the third day, Aron started to save his urine in a bottle for when the inevitable happened and he ran out of water. He was doing everything he could think of to survive. He'd also started coming up with ideas on how to create a tourniquet for his arm. And he'd pretty much given up with the idea of ever being able to move the boulder. And so he then began exploring option number 3, cutting off his own arm.
No. I mean, but obviously he did the right thing, but
yeah. First, just thinking through the possibility and the outcome, and then actually seeing if he would be able to do it.
It's pretty much suicide. It's 4 hours from here to my vehicle. Climbing would probably be impossible with one hand. The blood loss and my dehydration, I think, are ruling that out. I think I would die if I cut my arm. Jesus. I tried cutting my arm off. I couldn't even barely break the skin with this stupid knife. I tried a couple different blades, and all I did was just mark myself up. I can barely even get any blood to draw.
So as you can hear, Aron's cheap blade, his little multi-tool knife, was too blunt to do anything. It was too blunt to even cut the hair on his arm, because also he'd been using that to chip away at the boulder. So he was out of options. He began to think about his family and how stupid he'd been. He was so sort of annoyed at himself for getting himself in this situation. His sister had an upcoming wedding, and he knew that his death was going to affect that. And he was annoyed at himself for putting that on his family. On the 4th day, while chipping away at the rock, again, he'd given up hope of everything, but he still never gave up. While he still had energy, he still continued to try everything that he could. So while chipping away at this rock, his knife slipped and pierced the top of his thumb. The thumb on the hand that was pinned. And he said the knife went in like warm butter.
Oh!
And all of a sudden, this putrid smelling gas came spin out. His hand had started to decompose.
Oh, God! Oh, that's hideous.
That is his thought. He was immediately disgusted and horrified at the thought of his decomposing hand still attached to his body. Was gruesome. So he really started pulling and tugging and throwing his body at the boulder, hitting it and kicking it, and trying to get this thing off. But it still wouldn't budge. Then he realized that instead of trying to use the knife to saw through his skin, he could stab into his arm with the knife. So he took his little 2-inch dull blade and he started to stab through the skin of his forearm. And to his absolute delight, It went in. It
Right.
pierced the skin and it drew blood. But to his absolute disappointment, the knife quite suddenly came to rest on his bone. He knew that there was absolutely no way that his knife was going to be able to cut through bone. And he was devastated. Absolutely devastated. So on the 5th day, on the Wednesday, he took his blunt knife and he carved 4 letters into the canyon wall. Aron, his name. He then carved his date of birth and his approximate date of death and wrote underneath it RIP. He took his recorder out and recorded one last time.
My name's Aron Ralston. My parents are Donna and Larry Ralston of Englewood, Colorado. Whoever finds this, please make an attempt to get it to them. Be sure of it. I would appreciate it.
Meanwhile, Aron had been missing from his job now for 2 days. He'd failed to turn up on the Tuesday, and his boss knew something must have been wrong. Aron was incredibly reliable. He never would have just not turned up for work. But he actually figured that he would give him one more day. He knew that Aron was capable of getting himself out of a tricky situation. And what he actually said was, if Aron had broken his leg somewhere, he knew it would take him a day to crawl out and get help. So he was like, I'll give him another day. And he would give him until Wednesday. When Wednesday morning came around and there was still no sign of Aron, he then began calling Aron's friends and family. But of course, Aron hadn't told a single person where he was going. His mother called the police, though, to report him missing. But the police, they couldn't do anything. They had no information about where he could be. So although he was missing, they didn't even know where to begin searching. His mum spent all of Wednesday getting in touch with anyone that she could just to be able to help. She would ring one person up and then ask what she could do, but then also ask, who else can I call? What else can I possibly do? And she managed to break into Aron's emails. She said she spent hours trying to guess his passwords and things like that. And then she suddenly realized, actually, I know everything about him. I can just answer the security questions and reset his password. So she got in. I know. She got into his email and searched his emails to see if he'd sent anything to anyone, just for a clue as to where he could be. And she managed to find that Aron had mentioned to somebody that he wanted to explore BlueJohn. Didn't say when, where, how, or anything, but just it was a possibility that he wanted to go and do that. So she rang the park rangers at the national park and they located Aron's truck. And they said it had been there now for 5 days. But that wasn't unusual. So they weren't worried. A lot of people and families camped out for extended periods of time. But because now his friends and family are saying now he's actually missing, they mounted a search for Aron in the Canyonlands National Park. For Aron, night 5 was the worst night he had ever experienced. He had still had hardly any sleep since his ordeal began. And he began to hope that actually he wouldn't wake up the next morning. He began hoping for a flash flood to come through, so at least he could get some water and perhaps the boulder would dislodge with the debris. He'd been fantasizing about food and water for days. He'd officially ran out of water days ago and resorted to drinking his urine. And that night, night 5, during a period of unconsciousness, I don't want to say sleep because I wouldn't say it was sleep.
No.
Just at some point he fell unconscious. He actually had a dream. And he dreamed that he had a small son. He said that, it's a bit specific. He said his son was around 3.5 years old. And he could see that he was playing with his son. But although he was playing with his son, he had his right arm missing. And this dream gave him a small bit of comfort. And to his amazement, Aron made it through the night. And he checked his watch and looked to the sky for the familiar sight of the raven flying overhead, as he'd done every morning. But today there was no sight of the raven. So Aron wondered what that could mean. His dream had given him a possible glimpse into the future, and now the raven, the death bird, the bird that is sort of attached to death, had been present with him every day, was now gone. And while Aron thought about his options, a revelation hit him. He knew he had never had any hope to cut through his bone with his tiny pocket blade. But he didn't have to saw through them. He could break them.
Oh.
His arm was pinned so tightly that he could actually use the boulder to his advantage.
Oh, Jesus.
So, facing the boulder, he took his left arm and he gripped the top back of the boulder furthest away from him, and he used his feet to leverage as much height as possible, and with all his might, he slowly forced his body upwards so that his right arm that was pinned was being raised up until we heard a loud pop that echoed through the canyon. He'd broken his ulnar, the bottom of the 2 forearm bones.
Oh.
He used the same tactic, but now in a downward motion. He dropped his body weight down until it was enough for a second pop to echo loudly around him. Both of his bones were now broken.
Oh.
He felt absolutely no pain. He felt elation, euphoria. He said that the feeling that he was now one step closer to being free eradicated all sense of pain. So now that his bones were broken, they actually luckily broke in the same place. His ulnar and radius snapped in the same place. He dove headfirst into this task. It cutting through his skin and his muscle.
Oh, God.
It was
makes me so uncomfortable. I mean, I know it was worse for Aron, but oh God.
It was by no means a surgical procedure. There was no cutting neatly, slicing through anything. Aron hacked away at his arm with this dull blade that he had. Blood splashing up the canyon wall, pouring down the canyon wall. He cut through his skin and his muscle, and then he exposed an artery. And when he saw this artery, he realized that he had forgotten to apply his tourniquet.
Oh, shit.
So he'd actually pulled out this rubber tubing from his water skin days ago and had thought about using that as a tourniquet. So he wrapped that tightly around his upper arm. He continued hacking away at his arm, and he left the arteries and the nerves to last, and he began working his way through the tough tendon. The knife did nothing to the tendon, so he ended up switching to the pair of little pliers on the end of the multi-tool, and he began just pulling at it, twisting it, just doing everything he could. Sorry. He was like chopping into it, just trying to break it.
Here. Oh.
I think Aron must have dissociated from the fact that was to be able to do that task. He must have completely dissociated the fact that was his arm that he was doing. But once he managed to shred this bit of tendon, he knew he had very little time. Once he'd cut the arteries, he had very little time to then get out and get to rescue. So he decided to tackle his nerve. It's a singular strand, little thicker than a hair. And he said even touching the knife against it sent white-hot agony up to his shoulder. He said it was like putting his arm in molten metal.
Oh, God.
After an hour of hacking away at his arm, he took one last deep breath and in a single upward motion sliced through the nerve and the arteries. And the momentum carried him backwards and he stumbled away from the boulder.
Oh.
Free. After 127 hours trapped by the boulder, for the first time in 6 days, he was able to move freely away from his tomb. but he wasn't completely free.
Oh,
He still needed to make his way out of the canyon. He was only 15 minutes from the entrance, but he knew there was no way he could climb back up the way he'd come with just one arm. So he popped his amputated arm in a sling tightly across his chest. He packed up his equipment and he headed away from the entrance, further into the canyon. It was uncharted territory. He had no idea what he was going to face. He had no idea what obstacles could potentially be in his way. At some parts of the canyon, it was so deep that there was no light at all, and Aron had only his head torch for light. He was dehydrated, starving, losing blood, and yet with only one arm, managed to make it out of the canyon. And as he rounded the last corner, he literally saw a light at the end of the tunnel.
oh, thank God.
He stood at the exit looking out, taking in the fresh air and the openness of his surroundings after being so closed in for so long. The exit was literally a crack in the surface of sheer rock either side of him. It's a spectacular sight. He was standing on a small ledge facing a 20-meter drop that he would have to rappel down. He was so weak and dizzy from his blood loss that he almost fell headfirst over the edge. But he regained his balance and he set about preparing his ropes, tying them to a small rock before lowering himself down. At the bottom of the canyon, he found a pool of water, but it was rancid and stagnant, and floating in it, a dead raven.
Oh.
Despite this, he drank thirstily from it, and he sat by this pool of dirty water for 15 minutes, cupping handfuls of the disgusting water into his dry mouth. He filled up his water bottles and prepared for the next part.
Hang on a minute. Handfuls.
Handful.
Handful.
Not hands.
Handful after handful.
Handfuls.
Not at the same time.
He now had a 13-kilometer hike out of the canyon and back to his car.
Oh my God.
That's 8 miles, which for the average walker, not on the verge of death, would take around 2 to 3 hours. And not only that, what was he going to do when he get back to his car? The nearest hospital was miles away. But something drove him to continue. It was now around 1 p.m. Thursday afternoon, and unbeknownst to Aron, there was a huge search party. And unbeknownst to Aron, there was a huge search operations going on around him. Rescuers were located near Aron's truck, and a helicopter had been sent out to scout the area. But rescuers believed they were looking for a body. On the other side of the canyon, Aron continued to walk. His movements getting slower, his body fatigued from the effort of just trying to stay alive. 6 miles into his 8-mile hike, he stumbled upon his saviour, a couple from the Netherlands with their son. And Aron calmly walked up to them and said, "Help, help, I need help. I need medical attention. I just had to cut off my arm a few hours ago."
Oh.
Like, just really nonchalant about it, really blasé. And they obviously couldn't believe what they were seeing. Aron was covered in blood from head to toe. Blood stained his bare legs. He was ghostly white and he was skeletal looking. And he just came stumbling towards them. And they gave him everything that they had. But all they had was 2 Oreos and some fresh water.
My kind of people.
Yeah, just packed 2 Oreos. The wife and child ran ahead to try and flag down any help that they could find, while the husband stayed behind to help Aron walk. He was so dehydrated that he said he couldn't walk without holding water in his mouth. Every pant of breath parched his mouth and throat. He could feel that his body was getting weaker and weaker, but he still managed to walk another 2 miles until just in the distance, he could see his truck. His truck that was sitting atop an 800-foot steep hill.
Oh, shit.
The trail that led him to his rescue would be the death of him. He knew that. He knew that there was no way he could make it up that 800-foot steep hill. His heart was beating out of his chest, and he felt like he could hear it pounding in his ears. Ahead of Aron, the man had been walking with his arms waving frantically in the air. The beating of Aron's heart grew louder and louder in his head, and he slowly raised his head to see what the man was waving at, and saw, directly above him, a rescue helicopter.
Oh, thank God.
It had been out for hours searching for Aron, and it was just leaving to go and refuel when below them on the ground, they saw someone waving at them. They landed the helicopter, and Aron stumbled over to the pilot and said, "I've cut my arm off. Can I have a ride?" Always cool, always calm.
Got any spare?
Always collected. Aron knew that this helicopter was his saviour, and he knew that he'd made it. Aron was airlifted to the nearest hospital. He'd lost 25% of his blood volume and 40 pounds in weight, which is nearly 3 stone.
Jesus.
He arrived at the hospital 12 minutes later, where he calmly walked in on his own and was taken in for emergency surgery, but not before pointing out on a map where he had been trapped, the exact point where he had been trapped. The pilot and his crew made a trip back to the canyon in the hope that they would be able to retrieve Aron's hand and have it be reattached. I don't think they knew the extent of what had happened. When they arrived at the spot, they could then see that there was absolutely no way they could retrieve the hand for Aron. And they said it was a sobering sight. The boulder was bloodstained. There were splashes of blood running down the wall. There was the ropes and the pulley system still tangled around the boulder that Aron had tried to save himself with. It would take 13 men, a winch, and a hydraulic jack to move the boulder and retrieve Aron's decaying hand.
Ooh.
It was later cremated and given back to Aron for him to scatter the ashes. 6 months after the accident, fitted now with a prosthetic arm, Aron would be back at BlueJohn. But this time he wasn't alone. He was with a film crew, a presenter, and expert guides. He would make his way down into BlueJohn, despite his missing limb and without the help of any of the crew. He was just so determined to do it by himself. The crew and the presenter are like, do you need help? And he's like, no, I can do it. And he's like trying to lower himself down with one arm.
Yeah.
And because he's got a prosthetic arm, but he doesn't have a hand at the end. It's got like a pincer.
Right.
So he could grab things. So he can't really use it to kind of steady himself. And he's just so determined that he just doesn't need their help. They make their way expertly through the canyon until they reach the place where Aron was trapped, where everything happened. He takes a second for himself and allows a small tear, and the producer asks him what he's thinking. And he just kind of sighs and he just says, just how pitiful the situation was, how pathetic it was. And he was just so angry at himself for allowing himself to be caught in a situation like that. But it just goes to show the sort of person that he is, that he's like looking down on it and kind of like at how pathetic he was, but he just never gave up ever. It's actually a fantastic documentary to watch. It's really, really inspiring, and it's called Desperate Days in BlueJohn Canyon. You can find it on YouTube. It's really, really good.
I'll give it a watch.
But it really was Desperate Days in BlueJohn Canyon. But something drove Aron to survive. And he said if you'd asked him before his accident, a hypothetical situation in where he might have needed to cut his arm off to save himself, he said to everybody, there's no way that I would do that. He wasn't the sort of person to do anything like that. So it just goes to show how strong a person's will to survive can be.
Yeah.
In 2005, Aron went on to become the first person to climb all of the Colorado 14ers in winter and solo.
Jeez.
He'd done 40 of them out of the 59 and then had his accident, and then afterwards carried on where he'd left off as if nothing had happened. Neither his accident or his amputation ever stopped him from his passion of climbing mountains and exploring the outdoors. And he went on to speak publicly about his ordeal and even wrote a book about it. And
Wow.
he's just such a like humble guy. He's really good to kind of listen to him talk about his experience.
Wow.
Yeah, it's an amazing story, and I'd actually never watched the film. Obviously, it was turned into a film with James Franco.
Yes,
and
I've seen the film.
I'd
couple
never
of
watched
times.
it because it never really, but it wasn't really anything that I was bothered about. I thought it'd be really boring just watching him stuck in a canyon for that long. But
Yeah.
it honestly, when I started researching it, I was like, my goodness, he went through absolute hell.
Yeah.
The isolation alone, just being down there for that long with just your thoughts,
Yeah.
the dehydration, the lack of sleep, and yeah, like it was literally a tunnel where the wind just swept down it constantly, and it was constantly cold at night, but in the day it was boiling.
Yeah. Well, it's the desert, isn't it? It's like, but I mean, you'd be in shock as well, wouldn't you? Your body would be in shock, which makes you cold.
Yeah.
So I can't imagine, he was losing weight. He was thin anyway.
Yeah, he was very lean because
Yeah.
he was a climber, so he had no no fat reserves at all.
No. I mean, that's what my life has been building up to. If I get stranded somewhere, I've got plenty of fat reserves.
Always prepared for the apocalypse.
Always. I don't want to be this tubby, but I have to think about, I have to think about emergencies. So always prepared.
Always.
Well, that is that's a hideous story. That was really difficult to listen to. But in a different way as normal. Normally I go away from these like mentally and emotionally scarred, and this time I feel it's more a physical damage that you've done.
Oh.
I feel queasy.
Yeah.
Got a new appreciation for my hands.
Yeah, for me, I have to visualize what's being told, otherwise it kind of doesn't mean anything. If I can't visualize the location of where it happened, how it happened, and what exactly he was doing at what time, then I can't, it doesn't build a picture for me.
Well, I'm the same, so you built that picture.
Graphic.
Lovely. Yeah.
Oh, well, you're welcome. I mean, the people asked for this, not me. I put it out there and the people requested it.
Yeah, it's not our fault.
No.
You all brought this on yourself, and you also brought it on me, so thanks.
Yeah. The next one won't be so graphic.
Well.
Thank you.
Oof. Lolly.
Well, see you next time.
Yeah. See you next time. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
If you have enjoyed listening to our episodes, make sure you rate us and leave us a review on whatever platform you are listening.
We absolutely love hearing from you guys. So you can also help support our show by donating to our Buy Me a Coffee link. We will make sure that you get a massive shout out and a big thank you in our next week's episode.
You can also follow us on social media at Perplexed Podcasts. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and if you want to see more videos and blooper reels, subscribe to our TikTok and YouTube channels.
You can also email us your stories at perplexedpodcasts@gmail.com.
And you can find all the relevant links in the episode descriptions. Thanks for listening. Bye.
Bye.
Trigger warning, this episode is graphic. You should use one of those. Disgusting.
Disgusting.
Yeah.